I put it on equal footing as everything else about the resilience and all that. If you're running a data center, you're having a service, it's absolutely bad to be down for a certain amount of time. And down can be your internet went down, the servers went down, the server farm went down, or you got attacked. And you're putting that equally in that same can. So your ability to put that on par with all of those other ones, which is people I think recognize your systems need to be up and running for X amount of time, a minimum amount of downtime. Cybersecurity is just one of those aspects that can bring downtime, whether it's a hurricane, power, weather condition, or supplier, it's downtime. And then the question is, how do you manage it and articulate it?
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm Senior Editor Pierre Ruth. And in today's episode, we are taking a look at reengineering your supply chain to be resilient. Maintaining a steady supply chain within your organization and workflow in the face of outside issues can have a significant impact on an organization's survivability, strength, and market presence. How you perform under duress can show competitors and your customers what you bring to the table when things could get tough. So today, we're going to take a look at what teams need or have done with certain resources, whether they're AI or blockchain or other tech resources that are out there to make their supply chain more resilient versus external issues that could be anything. It could be weather, it could be just some kind of local upheaval. So for this episode, we are joined by Lee Rossey, CTO for SimSpace. Lee, good to be seeing you.
Likewise.
And of course, we're joined again by a friend of the show, Pierre DeBois, CEO of Zimana Analytics. Pierre, good to be seeing you again.
Good to be here.
Okay, great. All right, so let's start off with you, Lee, talking a bit about resources. What resources have you looked to, tech resources have you looked to either in prior years to kind of look at ways to support your organization's supply chain resilience? What were some of the kind of things in the past that existed that you looked at, and then we kind of talk about where we are now with okay, here are the things that are useful for your team to kind of maintain that internal supply chain resilience.
No, very fair. And I'll put this in a couple of questions. What are the things that we buy to be able to run our business and to provide our services? And I think that's probably the main one right now. So we look at, in general, we run data centers, we run a bunch of equipment and all that. So we want to be able to buy, from, I call it trusted vendors. How much, use the vendors that you think are actually good in terms of supply chain, the provenance, where they're coming from, and all that side. So do as much as you can to be able to vet the hardware, the software, the tools to, again, be trusted and have some idea for what they're coming from. Same thing with the software. Are they using some funny, are they coming from some interesting business? But separately there's also the cybersecurity element of treat them as a black box. Assume that potentially something happened. So then how do you look for anomalies and weirdness coming out of them that you can use to be able to detect and quickly respond to it?
And have there been old school methodologies for resilience, that were in play before, kind of the current automation that came available, or certain this is the way you approach maintaining resilience with the organization that worked in the past, but things have changed with the newer tools that are available?
Well, supply chain was a little bit challenging during COVID in terms of getting equipment and all that, where things that took 30 days, ended up taking 9 months and all that kind of stuff. So to some degree, you start buffering, you start buying a few things, you start getting them set up and do this. So there's the hardware element that was a challenge. Software, it's much easier to be able to get. But I think even with just some of the newer regulations and other things, we want to be able to ensure that it is trusted. We monitor. We have a bunch of software that is actually looking to be able to validate what software is somebody running on their machines, where is it coming from, is it trusted, and those aspects. So it's not, I'll say, a free-for-all where everybody installs everything and just runs wild with whatever else. So there's a bit more checking on the software itself and validating the versions and all that. So we started implementing a lot more controls over the software used in general across our desktops, laptops, and data center to be a bit more controlled.
The particular elements that you've really said, okay, we need to focus on this to try to maintain resilience, the particular pain points, potential pain points, you say, okay, we need to make sure that we're trying to account for this to see that the teams, got things in place, for the, what are the just in case kind of things that you're, kind of like are top of mind?
I don't think it's as much of the buying stuff. It's really of the monitoring aspect. So what we spent a lot more time on is just making sure that once the devices are fielded and running and all that, we can quickly identify any issues if they are compromised, if they have been attacked in some way, and then take action on it. So it's a lot more monitoring and response. Again, I go back to the solar wind as a prominent example of a piece of software that was compromised. Trying to find the vulnerabilities inside a legitimate piece of software, very, very difficult. And it's almost like saying any piece of software is going to be zero defects, zero vulnerabilities. No, they're going to have some issues and all that. The question is, do you have the infrastructure, the tools, and the people in place to monitor and quickly identify if something funny is going on from a supply chain attack or compromise? So it's almost, don't try and find the 0 day, try and find the artifacts that are emanating out to identify that something is bad and then quickly take action.
And these days, you mentioned, the pandemic days, what are the kinds of things that we have to kind of like look for in terms of like external things that could happen, weather, power, you talked about, third party disruptions, solar, power outages, what are some other things? I mean, is it everything, we just kind of sit there and be like, good grief, got to worry about all the things that are happening, or there are certain things you're like, okay, these are unfortunately more likely things that could pop up that to kind of be alert for?
It's a little bit more fault tolerance, if you will. So we want to have multiple data centers, multiple setups. We do use a number of cloud solutions that are resilient in their own way, whether it's Google or Microsoft and others, and their data centers are set up. So I'd say that to some degree, the supply chain availability has migrated a bit by having redundancies, multiple vendors, multiple systems, and a lot of cloud providers as well that we can leverage.
And let's talk about tools if we can, like what kinds of things, what kind of tools, AI, automation, what have you, do you think about using, or have you already kind of decided like this makes the most sense to have in place or at least readily available when you're talking about kind of like bolstering your resilience?
Yeah. Again, we're a cybersecurity company. So from that standpoint, we look at the potential vulnerabilities of somebody compromising the supply chain, not necessarily the availability of the devices themselves. So that's where we really look at the potential compromise and how do we figure out if something has been going on? Somebody inserted malicious software, inserted stuff in there that can potentially compromise. We haven't had really much of an availability in terms of getting. Again, we're a smaller company. We're not massive, but as a smaller company using popular vendors, Dell and others, we have not had any real significant supply chain issues to worry about. So we buy a lot of software, commodity hardware, and that's been pretty available. It's really more, how do we trust that it is safe and not compromised?
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Appreciate your input on that. All right, Pierre, let's talk about, the importance of business operations and, having a, knowing that there's a plan or structure for resilience. How important it is to have that in place, to know that, should the unexpected, unfortunately you can't account for everything, but to have some kind of idea for resilience in place. How important is that, from an operational and business perspective?
I would say the answer to that is, in a very simple word, would be very important, or 2 words. If you have any business, you definitely have data, which reflects not only the customers you get and the information you have about customers, clients, and the products, but also represents activity. So it's important to, when you're trying to figure out, what's your strategy, or even from a supply chain perspective, what you should be protecting, it's important to take that data information and then try to figure out, what measurements you should be focusing on. This is the whole discussion about KPIs, basically. And we hear about key performance indicators of all sorts, but the purpose behind it is to put some sort of hierarchy on what things you should be monitoring, what's the primary thing that would take your business out versus what's the secondary thing that is kind of important and needs to be managed, but not necessarily the showstopper. I think it's very important to have those conversations. And I think what's happened probably not just with AI, but over the course of, since I've been in business, data has become much more important, but it's also driving how do we measure performance? How do we measure operations? And then then putting together some sort of structure around that, which means planning for the worst case scenarios and just, day-to-day operations, what we should be doing to kind of be at our peak. And I think that's the thing that's been happening over the last several years.
And when you're dealing with external or unexpected disruptions, is it enough to apologize to customers to say, oops, this happened? Just to say, to be upfront that something occurred, but to just kind of be like, well, we're sorry that happened, and then just try to move along? Or is it, important to show how resilient you can be to come back from what happened?
Yeah, I think I think customers are starting to appreciate the resilient part. I would say the first thing, apologizing is just standard table stakes, because you're trying to acknowledge that there's a problem. But customers really seem to, if they tend to follow their brands now and follow their favorite businesses. And even from a B2B standpoint, you have partners who are following you online. They may not be saying a lot, but they are. And the messages that you give in terms of how you're addressing the problem, what are the things that you're proactively doing to get it corrected? Those sort of things, it may not seem appreciated right at the moment, but over time, customers will give you a lot of leeway when you're making mistakes. We're starting to see that emerge, that messaging emerge in certain situations, as well as just the whole idea of just apologizing. I think customers are a little bit more savvy. I think your partners are more savvy than they used to be. And being able to tell your story about how you're correcting is right now probably one of the most important things you can do.
Definitely, see people say, yes, we see that happened, and now what? There's always a kind of question that customers and the public are asking these days. All right, so let's look at, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of the money part on the operations side of things. Just as overall, cybersecurity sometimes seen as being a cost with some organizations. They say, well, it's a cost, and they see it as a cost until something happens. When you're looking at overall resilience, how do you approach showing the worth of having things in place, resilient systems in place to your overall operations? How do you kind of communicate in between the IT side and the operations side to say, hey, yes, this comes across as a cost, but we need this in place for resilience so that you can do the thing that keeps us all going, keep the lights on, How do you have that kind of communication between those sides?
That is a good question. I can say it can get very complicated when you have partners. I can say from experience, a lot of times when I'm working with clients on analytics data, there's a lot of discussion on, the fix. But you want to have, when you give a piece of information, it needs to be related back to the core business, maybe not necessarily a KPI, but the core business objective that you're trying to address, where that core objective has been impacted by some sort of error or some sort of a misstep. You do need to sit down and that can take the form of a lot of ways. It could be a sit down discussion. It could be even something like in terms of email. Turning around and giving the story of what you are doing to correct the problem and trying to get everyone on sort of the same message boat for everything else. And I'll be honest with you, that's not just an IT or CI, or something for the CIO or companies that deal with data or digital. That's an engineering problem as much as well. I had 8 years at Ford Motor Company, and that while I was a design engineer and a process and a program engineer, much of my discussions were trying to get people on the same page, including suppliers and internal stakeholders. So that is something that I think everyone as a skill, let alone as a process, you need to be focusing on. I would say it's probably going to get more complicated as AI is being added into the mix, because now you have another layer that can diagnose, I'll say that with air quotes, diagnose certain problems, and can give some information that can either help your next steps, and in some cases might give you a little bit more wheel spin, more things to kind of turn around as you're trying to figure out how to get to a solution. But the communication part is vital.
Do you have anything to add that from your perspective of hey, trying to communicate hey, okay, I know you're seeing this as a cost, but we need to do this because...
I put it on equal footing as everything else about the resilience and all that. If you're running a data center, you're having a service, it's absolutely bad to be down for a certain amount of time. And down can be your internet went down, the servers went down, the server farm went down, or you got attacked. And you're putting that equally in that same can. So your ability to put that on par with all of those other ones, which is people I think recognize your systems need to be up and running for X amount of time, a minimum amount of downtime. Cybersecurity is just one of those aspects that can bring downtime, whether it's a hurricane, power, weather condition, or supplier, it's downtime. And then the question is, how do you manage it and articulate it? And that's, we put it on equal footing, if not more. As a cybersecurity company, we do not want to be, because it's not just the downtime, it's the potential loss of customer data, which has got its own set of issues that we need to be able to manage.
Gotcha. All right. Definitely appreciate both of your insights and thoughts. And now it is time for my favorite part, at least hopefully everyone's favorite part of the show. It's time for the tabletop exercise. The Ninja Turtles game screen is up. For those new to the show, this is, again, my favorite part where the panelists, our esteemed panelists, are going to be put through what is called Questionable Ideas R Us. It is a tabletop exercise where the guests will be interim executives for a fictional company known as Questionable Ideas R Us, which often finds itself in trouble based on its own misadventures and sometimes bad ideas. Now, the tabletop exercise questions have not been shared to the panelists in advance. They are over the top, but they are focused on today's topic. And one other caveat, as always, my guests are not responsible for the presence of gremlins, goblins, or kobolds in these IT shenanigans. This is entirely my fault. I'm to blame. Okay. So again, Lee, Pierre, you're going to be essentially in your same executive roles, but as interims for Questionable Ideas or Rest, with the same kind of powers and resources that you would have within your own organization, but as, the interim one. So you can hire, fire, dismiss, shut down things as you would in your existing roles. Okay, gentlemen, are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Scenario 1. The rock and rolling blackouts. The city where Questionable Ideas is headquartered is suffering a series of rolling blackouts due to strains on the power system that have not been immediately pinpointed. The main office cannot maintain steady operations because of the unreliable access to power. But the problem still affects teams who live in the home city who could work remotely, because they could also be hit by the sporadic blackouts. You do have teams in other cities outside the blackout zones that you could push work to, but you see unconfirmed reports that your team of gremlins have been overclocking nearby data centers for an undisclosed project causing these blackouts. How do you resolve restoring resilience and also deal with these wannabe rockstar IT gremlins on your own team?
So the gremlins are on our team?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, first of all, you start going and figure out what exactly are they doing and start looking into it to maybe stop the gremlins from eating away at all the cycles for that. So I would try and stop the problem at the source, if you will.
I would say also you have to I think on top of what Leah said too, you mentioned rock and roll gremlins, basically. Sometimes people want to be the hero in the story of trying to fix something. And there's nothing wrong with that, just from just being human and wanting to be recognized. But you need to also tell people when there's a time to be recognized when something is solved, not beforehand to say that you are the Superman or the Batman of that story. So I would say definitely get your gremlins focused on information, how they're sharing it, what they're sharing, and they don't necessarily have to be the superhero. It's not like a movie where they get to be paid millions of dollars to be the hero of a story. So.
Well, they're actually the villains in the story because they're causing the problem in the first place. Let's talk a little further on like the idea that the headquarters is dealing with these rolling blackouts, unreliable. Even the local teams, how do you then? But you do have further remote teams. You just push things out to those remote teams and just call it a day, or are there other steps that they need to be taken to kind of make sure there's a resilience in workflow?
I think it's both. Figure out what the problem is at home, try and actually stem that one out, but also keep the things running, which means distribute out the work to the other ones. And the question is it just the work, or are you providing services? In other words, can you maintain the availability and maintain the services out of another facility? Yes, shift over to that if possible. And so tackle both sides of it.
And I would also have monitoring how you're communicating to those remote teams is paramount. Are they responding? And not, it doesn't, I don't think it has to necessarily be formal, but are they responding to the issues? Are they being addressed and giving progress? I think that part is really important. I mentioned about, engineering. It's important to, for anything that's technical, to kind of figure out, are people acknowledging that they got the message? And then two, what is being done is the solution being progressively being put into place? And I think those two things are what you want to look at. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, whether it's by email, which is kind of loosey-goosey, or you can have an engineering system where something has a ticket and having the communication around that. I think that's vitally important.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how much it's impacting, set up your little war room, get everybody in there, start basically assigning, start checking every hour, whatever the frequency you think is important with the regular checks. But you want to be on top of it, and you're going to be pulling together all the people responsible for everything you've described, including lawyers as necessary, depending on what our little gremlins are up to. If it's just internal havoc, or they're having a wider impact beyond the organization.
There is some hint that the gremlins are actually just trying to play a lot of Dance Dance Revolution, and they're overclocking the data centers just to do that. Okay. Scenario 2, the quarantine quantum leap. Power is back online, and teams are ready to get back on track for the next deliverable that they're due. But while Questionable Ideas has navigated the blackouts, a flock of endangered penguins, very real endangered penguins, have waddled their way onto the company's headquarters grounds. The penguins cannot be disturbed because they are protected and endangered species and must be allowed to, hopefully, continue to migrate to new grounds, though they might take up permanent residence on the property. Authorities will allow limited, monitored access to the headquarters for a narrow window of time. How do you prioritize what to push to remote teams out of the headquarters resources? And what resources do you make use of potentially for a long-term shift to those remote resources? Now, hang on one second. While this is going on, the goblins, not the gremlins, the goblins on your team have been spotted putting on penguin costumes to blend in with the quarantine penguins. They say it will boost team morale for everyone to have a penguin friend in the office. So, let's talk about how you're going to prioritize the push to the remote resources, and then also dealing with goblins who think that everyone should have their own penguin in the office.
Pierre, you want to
start? I'm still stuck on the penguin imagery. I think, and we talked a little bit about communication and trying to follow issues and the importance of communication. I would think, and I'm trying to think of the best way to respond to this. I'm thinking in terms of, I guess, how do you document solutions? I think can be a entry point to talk about, how do you, how you're working with those remote teams. I think that's a part of it, because then what you're doing is you're trying to, I think in the heat of addressing issues, there's going to be a lot of solutions brought up, but you might want to at least get some sort of point where the final process that you're trying to establish across teams, that there's some sort of way of kind of letting people know that, this is what you want to look for if you see this type of solution across the bat. So I think in terms of documentation, I'm not sure how to stop the goblins from being penguins, so to speak. But I think you do need to, I mentioned about documentation. I think at that point, you're trying to kind of make sure that there's some sort of genuine things are in place. And I probably guess that would include dealing with the goblins who are trying to be penguins, so to speak. At least that's what I think off the bat.
Yeah, I'll be more pragmatic. And I guess we love our penguins. We don't want to endanger them or anything else. But are they affecting our ability to run our business? Are they affecting the ability to actually just keep things going? If not, people just come in, do their work and all that. If, for example, people cannot get into work conduct stuff, then we may say, hey, work from home for a little bit while we kind of resolve some of the issues. But maintain the business running, keep things operating and all that kind of stuff. And of course, work with the penguins and the goblins and all that as they're going through. But it really comes down to, are they impacting your ability to kind of conduct business and deliver what you're doing? If not, all right, you have some friendly neighbors outside in your courtyard, if you will, to do that.
Have we come to a point overall where we as a whole have learned to like decentralize things, because of the pandemic, what have you, so that moving things out, even like really core, super top secret, this is super proprietary resources that shouldn't be removed in the past would not be removed remotely, can be moved in such a way?
I'll give you my answer. I think in general with COVID and everything else, there's a lot of remote distributed setup, whether it's the teams, the location, the facilities and all that. So it's not relying on one building and one set of people that can actually go in there. Even for the data centers and the people that they can remote in and they can actually do their job. And again, COVID did accelerate a lot of that by providing the access and the means to be able to. And even for the super secret facilities, there's usually some standoff distance and some perimeters and some controls around that to be able to maintain those. So I think we are in a distributed remote age where that particular problem is not as big of an issue. Now it opens up different problems. Now there's doors that other people else can potentially get in there, and you need to monitor and safeguard those remote access setups.
Bribing the goblins with plushy penguins is always an option too, to get them from trying to put the endangered species at risk and potentially drawing fines. Okay, last scenario. The uninvited black hat visitors. With the teams adjusting to the new penguin paradigm, there are reports of some resources going dark and some sensitive data being stolen. You soon get word that an overseas office on the border of an area that has conflict happening had to be evacuated. The team members are safe and accounted for, but company hardware did get left behind and might have been used by bad actors to compromise the company's systems. As you prepare to recalibrate again, the kobolds reach out with their own solution. Recentralize all resources back to the headquarters and cut off all remote access. If you're worried about the endangered penguin situation, the kobolds promise to send them to a better place. Just don't ask where or how.
I'm sorry, Pierre, go ahead and start. I keep putting you on the spot there.
That's okay. That's fine.
That's the point.
It's a lot.
It's meant to be a lot.
Yeah, I know. But I think that's also the point of we mentioned about communication and documenting. And I think the other part of it too is, and there's one more I want to bring in, is having some sort of repository where you have some sort of central information that you agree upon that you can coordinate across your remote teams. Having that resource can help draw better comments and questions about what the teams are doing in terms of, for this last example as well, is it something that will be beneficial long term? Again, because you're trying to figure out, you get a lot of issues that crop up, things that black out your team, that are blackouts that prevent your teams from getting things done, and preventing your business from operating. But the corrections are the things that you might want to have at hand and build a library of sorts for your organization. So that way, when teams are remote and doing these type of steps, they have some resources to turn to that everyone can kind of say, hey, this is a good starting point at least. So that way they don't feel like they're trying to reinvent the wheel or come up with solutions that maybe are too unique, but don't scale across the organization to manage cost, manage time, and manage productivity.
Yeah, I'm stuck on three things. You said the gear was compromised in my building.
In one of the remote offices.
Oh, it was compromised in a remote office?
Yes, a remote office.
Okay. Because Okay, got it. So we don't want to use that because that's potentially, we want to investigate what's going on with that one, but that's not the priority. Let's just figure out what's happening over there. We got everybody back into the office. And then the Cobalt team is offered to kindly get rid of the penguins and goblins. To do that, do we take them up? I guess it goes back to is can we get around the penguins and the goblins to get into work to be able to actually do what we need to be doing? So great that they're there, but if I can just walk past them, through them, whatever else. Cool.
Mind you, the kobolds carry knives.
That is damaging.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe this is one of those where you have to start asking the question is what's the bad press and the reaction of potentially doing something to the penguins that you may not be proud of how they're dealt with as an aftermath of doing it. So there's the balance here between whatever you're doing for your business versus the collateral bad press of how you treated the penguins and going through. So there's a little bit of a business choice there about is the cure worse than the problem that you're facing? And that'll go into the equation itself. But I try to get through them, but as a last resort, really call in the knives to deal with them.
How difficult, challenging is it to kind of isolate? Let's say there is, here's an identifiable remote problem area space that the compromise is coming from, that part of the house. How challenging is it to kind of like isolate, that for what it is and, try to, continue trucking on and then deal with that as you can?
This goes back to the first part you're talking about preparedness and kind of getting into. If you have the infrastructure, you have the ability to monitor, you can detect what's actually happening, you have the teams to be able to handle that, then they should be prepared, ready to go and respond. That's what they've been trained for. That's what they've been actually ready to do. That's why you spent all that money to justify why you're doing it. So I think if you have the tools and the people in place, it becomes just standard. I'm not saying it's a routine. It's just like getting attacked. All right, I know what to do. I'm dealing with it. I'm responding. And I'm recovering. And I have built enough resilience into my enterprise where just that one office is not going to take me down. So I just shift the workload over to the side. If you have not spent any money on resilience, tools, and all that, then you're running blind. And when you're running blind, then you're kind of going through the crisis of, oh my God, what is it? What's going on? What's the impact? How widespread it is? Is it just that office? Is it my main office as well? I just don't even know it. So I think it helps to understand what's going on. How do I contain it? And is it pervasive? I just may have noticed in the branch, but maybe it's throughout everything else. And then you can start making some better decisions on it.
Gotcha. Great. All right. Well, preparedness could potentially save the penguins going forward.
It gives a good starting point for guardrails as well, too. I know a lot of times with AI, there's a whole discussion of, just automation, but we don't seem to talk enough about the guardrails. There's tools now that are helping to put some sort of ground truth to what you're dealing with and in terms of your processes. So that way what Lee said, that way when you can make those moves, you can do it within reason and not have your having your hair on fire trying to figure out what the next moves are and get lost in the process. So definitely, at minimum, if we don't have those guardrails, at least consider the fact that this is a good starting point to have that discussion. It's okay to start off someplace and try to organize, but the important part to what Lee said is organize. That's a big part of it.
Great. All right. Well, gentlemen, that does it for the scenarios. So thank you so much for navigating questionable ideas. Russ, no penguins were harmed in the crafting of this episode. So again, my thanks for being on this episode. Pierre, Lee, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much.